Good afternoon, and welcome to Gender and Power in the Age of Me Too. So I'm excited to be here with you, and I'm excited to be here with Ann Doyle.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Marie. I am someone who has been awaiting this Me Too moment for nearly 5 decades. So let's go. I'm also a journalist, as Marie. I was a television news journalist for 10 years, and then television sports. I'm one of the women who opened the sports locker rooms in this country. Then I moved on to Ford Motor Company, so I have a whole corporate background with Ford Motor Company. I've run for political office, and I also wrote a book on women's leadership, and actually did a lot of work for the State Department when Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State there. So I am tremendously excited that we are at this moment of some momentum I've been waiting for at least 2 decades.
Obviously, at the core of this moment that we find ourselves in, fundamentally, Me Too is a conversation about power. And whether or not you have experienced sexual harassment in the workplace or have colleagues or friends who've experienced it, I think that in terms of the questions of power inequity in the workplace, that there are many, many, many of us who have had Me Too moments and are trying to sort out what this, quote unquote, reckoning means. Mm-hmm. I actually wanted to start by asking Ann a question, because in your book you talked about the fact that the United States has dropped over 20 spots since 2015 in the Global Gender Equity Report.
Right.
So we're now 43rd. And I wanted you to unpack for us, perhaps, why we're in that position.
Right. One of the things that I did in updating the book was obviously go through all of the research that's in the book. And people are really shocked when I tell them that all of the numbers are worse since my book first came out 5 years ago. So anyone who thinks that the United States is doing pretty well, you don't know the numbers. And we actually have dropped 20 points among 144 developed countries in the world in terms of equity between men and women. And so we're now out of the top 20 and sinking. And part of that is because other countries in the world, other developed countries, are improving. But the United States is losing ground significantly in terms of women's health care and rights around that. Also in terms of political empowerment, which is the number of women in political leadership, we're 78th in the world. So we're doing, we've been stalled for a long time, and that's why this moment that we have right now, we have to seize it. And not let it go. We have to figure out a way to really challenge it and make sure that we use it to actually move forward.
Right. But I think it's important, especially when you're with audiences of folks who may not necessarily remember what the workplace was like for women, 50 years ago or 40 years ago. I was going to ask you if you could take us back. Because certainly you've been a pioneer and a trailblazer.
Oh, wow. There are many women in this room I know who can match me story for story. But one of the things that I did in my book, it wasn't just what I knew. I went out and interviewed, I have about 150 hours of transcribed interviews from women in all kinds of industries to really sort of understand what does it take for all these incredibly educated, high-achieving women who are in the workplace now to regain momentum and start moving into leadership in big numbers, the way we once moved into the professions in significant numbers, that it's norm now for women to be these judges and doctors and lawyers, all these kinds of things. And how do we regain that momentum? And one of the things that I would say about that is that I wrote a chapter on each of the 3 different generations of high-achieving women in the workplace today. And my generation, we're the pioneering we're the baby boomers. We were those Marines who had to fight our way in. And then along came the Gen X's, many Gen X's in this room right now who are really in significant positions of influence. Whereas baby boomers are kind of waning. I tell my baby boomer women, don't leave us. We need you. But the power is moving toward the Gen X women and the millennials who are now really coming along and hitting their stride. And so many of the millennials have no sense of what those fights were and how easy it is to lose rights that actually I see slipping away right now. So I think partly we need to make sure we are giving them the information they need so they can go quicker than we did, and also, you know, support them and say, come on, let's go. Because it's the millennials, I believe, who are leading the Me Too movement right now. And I come from Detroit, and Michigan State University is 1 hour away from me, which is where Dr. Larry Nassar and the whole crisis regarding the USA women gymnasts occurred. And, you know, it's those young women who are raising their voices now, and some of them are saying, you mean you tolerated all of this for decades? Yeah, because they weren't listening and we didn't have the power that we have today. So I think the millennials, with Gen X's and baby boomer support, are our moment to really turn a big corner.
It's funny.
Do you agree with that, Marie?
I completely agree with that. I think that we're at a moment right now where if I even just take a look in my own shop, being at PBS the last several months has been challenging, not just at PBS, but in media across the board. And really, it has been the younger staff members and others who have held management to an account. How do we continue advancing that conversation around structure and the things that need to be put in place within our organizations to both facilitate better relationships between men and women in the workplace and address some of these gender parity issues?
Yeah, I think that there's tremendous hunger right now, and I'll give you a couple of examples about it. I'm retired from Ford Motor Company, and you may have noticed, Ford's a chamber member, of course, that they just fired one of their most senior executives about 10 days ago, in charge of all North America global operations for the company, a very senior executive. And he was fired for sexual harassment. But you know what? He's been at the company for 30 years. And so for what was going on for 25 years, did he never misbehave for 25 years there? No, it's an example, obviously, that we are at a moment for potential structural change. There's a new CEO there, Jim Hackett, who came in from the outside, and he made a commitment to do things, and now powerful signal they're going to do things. But I also had just a major law firm call me on the way to the airport saying, Ann, we need to do something about Me Too. Can you help us? Can you tell us who's an expert in this? Who can come in and work with us? And so I think there's tremendous hunger. I think there's a lot of, we don't know. Companies don't know. And maybe there are people in this room who have some ideas, but there's tremendous hunger at this moment. And I think we really need to very actively go after it and help. And even, I want to mention that a dear friend of mine is here who lives in Falls Church. I'm staying at her home, and her nephew is there. He's 26 years old, and we were talking about Me Too. And here's a master's degree, 26-year-old young man who said to me, and I have he's 24, my son is 26, who said, I'm really uncomfortable and wary about being accused of something that I didn't mean. And if I were in a position to mentor a woman, I don't think I would do it. And I hate to hear that. And I expected to hear it perhaps from older generations of men, but to hear it from a 26-year-old young man, I think it shows the confusion and the hunger and the need. How do we address structural change, cultural change in a positive way?
I do want to talk a little bit, though, more specifically about the role of men in the workplace as they're confronting these issues, and how we begin to think about getting them more involved and kind of pulling them into the conversation. How do you think about that?
Well, one of the things I noticed is, and I care deeply about this, I started working on a book that clearly the next piece of all this, of course, is engaging men, welcoming and engaging men as gender allies, essential in terms of all this. So I started doing all that research. But when this whole Me Too situation came up, I'm one of 7 children. And so I have 3 brothers. And I thought to myself, here was story after story after story coming out. We were just getting pounded in the news media for a while there. And not one of my brothers emailed me or asked me or said, hey, Ann, did any of this ever happen to you? And I finally thought, wow, I wonder why they didn't ask me. And then part of me thought about the fact that maybe I never told them either. Maybe I never brought it up. And then I finally did ask one of my brothers, my oldest brother, Danny, and he said to me, ooh, that's a really hard question. And he said, maybe I thought you probably did have things happen to you, but maybe you didn't want to talk about it. And so I think part of it is us needing to open the conversation with men and say, I really do want to talk about this with you, and start with the men who welcome that conversation, and then engage them as our allies, because I think men are going to listen to other men in terms of, and I had a Dow Chemical as a client of mine, and a Dow Chemical executive said a great thing at a women's conference, and he said, imagine that there's this swimming pool and a cocktail party. And he said, a bunch of the women are in the pool. And he said, there's probably about 30% of the men who are in the pool with you. And he said, there's about 40% of the men who are standing around the pool wondering if the guys are going to drown or if they're having fun. And the other men, they're heading for the bar. And he said, forget about the men who are heading for the bar. We other men who are in the pool with you, we have to get those guys in the pool. And so those are my thoughts on engaging men.
You wrote a section where you talked about women oftentimes not realizing that leadership is a team sport, and that in fact, because of that, perhaps standing in the way of their own advancement in the workplace. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, now, this is a journalist. She actually read my book, and she didn't have a lot of time. Well, the thing I would say about that is that I feel that absolutely passionately, that for all of our achievements as individual women, we have barely begun to leverage our collective power. And men have been doing that for a long, long, long time. They can be very competitive with one another, but they understand that, you need to leverage your collective power. And women, I think, are in kindergarten in terms of that. And there's a great concept that anyone who is in construction knows this word. It's the word sistering. And sistering in construction actually is a very important word still today, and it's about strengthening the main constructural beams with other support. And to me, that's what it's about, is for all our individual power, we still all need support from our sisters and from our brothers. And that's, I think, our next big piece of work.